Okay, here we are. I think I got this all set up and going in the direction I want to go in. Something I've been working on for the last couple of days. I heard a speech by Carl Jung, not Carl Jung, by Jonathan Pageau the other day, in which he was talking about how Christianity retakes the culture. And then if you watch Meet the Blessed, a couple of nights ago, Jason had on Mr. Jim Jotras, uh, friend of the show, um, Jay Dyer, who's been on before, and our really close friend Buck Johnson. And the, Jay was making a point that like the that the culture is there for the Orthodox to grab hold of and to take. Ooh, I forgot to look something up. That's okay. I'll do that here in a minute. When I get to it, but he was making a good point that um, the culture is there for the Orthodox to take if the Orthodox would just stay faithful to the traditions and to the culture of the church. And there's something to be said about that. But I wanted to start with this quote by Carl Jung. Sorry, Buck, I messed up on uh, who said this quote. I even had the quote like kind of jacked up, but I got you the right concept. But so Carl Jung had said modern man can't see God because he doesn't look low enough, right? So if you are far away from the church, if you are living a secular life, going through the world as an atheist or as an agnostic, and you begin to look for God and you skip the step of walking towards the church, you're going to miss God altogether. You're going to be looking in all the wrong places. Whereas if you look around and you look at nature and you look at the way that the world is developed and created and structured for us to live in, how the human body is created and for the environment around us, how animals are created for the well-being of mankind, and you follow that path to the church, that's where you will find God. You will not find God on an individual journey. Now, that's not to say that nobody can, but I'm just speaking in generalities here. I think we can all understand some generalities um, when discussing this process. So I thought that was a really significant quote. And when I was listening to Jonathan Pageau talk about what it would take for Christians to retake the culture, that was one of the quotes that popped into my head because one of the things that Jonathan Pageau had mentioned, he had mentioned that we live in a world of horizontal culture and not a world of vertical culture. And I drew up a little graph, just kind of sketched it out. I'm not an artist, my dad is, but this will kind of give you the basic idea. So he said, Jonathan Pageau said, at the bottom of the on the horizontal culture is run by rebellion, and that leads to chaos. Whereas your vertical culture is led by obedience, and that leads to holiness. And I just thought down here at the corner where they intersect is the church. The church leads you to obedience, that leads you to holiness. And opposite of chaos, on the same side as the church, you would have order. And then from holiness down to the horizontal, you would have sin. So the further up this ladder you climb, the further away from sin and chaos you become. And holiness, as the saints, that's where you would want to be. That's what your goal ultimately is. And when I think about like our modern culture and the way that it's lays itself out, it is so it's so opposite. It's so inverted. It's so backwards from the way that it was. in the traditional like Christian societies. That's not to say that we weren't developed as a Christian nation, but let's discuss a little bit what it was to be a traditional Christian society. When a secularist or an atheist and agnostic sees this picture and they see the church and how big the church is and how much it stands out and it stands above every other building, they look at the priest or the heads of the church, the patriarchs, as thieves. They're like, yeah, well, they're stealing from the people in order to glorify themselves and build this massive structure. But that isn't the way that the culture of Christian communities was built. The communities came together and they pooled their money and resources and labored together and they built a church, a cathedral to God, to show God that they were thankful for what he had delivered them to. That community or that region that they were delivered that was delivered into their hands for them to care for and was they were grateful for that. So they would build this huge monument, the church, to God, where they would come together multiple times a week and worship together and worship God together and keep their eyes focused on him. And the church was the center point of the community because that was their pathway, that was their highway to heaven. That was the way that they were going to ascend into holiness was by paying these respects to God and worshiping and being constantly involved in the church life. So they built this huge monument to God in the form of the church. And then they built their town around that monument. And no building was to be bigger than that monument because if you built like if you built a building that was if you built a structure larger than your monument to God, then you were putting the worship upon a person, right? So you were then admiring the the greatness of the individual that built that large building and not the glorification of God. And that was what the society was based upon. That's how they built their societies and their structures. And that's why in many of these old, ancient Christian regions, these Christian communities, these structures are so monumental, is because it was the entire community was centered, was focused and centered on Christ, on God. And today we have a very different view of the way that society is structured. Let me get my notes over here next to me. So when the founders were talking about a virtuous people, they had a people that were centered, that were focused on God and ascending the vertical culture and not living amongst the horizontal culture. It didn't mean that there weren't, people that were secularist back in the day. I mean, they had prostitutes, they had blasphemers, and there were laws against these things, right? I mean, still to this day, there are laws against prostitution. Didn't mean they were excellent at always following through and carrying out the laws, and it didn't mean that these people weren't flawed. Just like if you read through the Bible and you see all the heroes of the Bible, it doesn't matter if you're talking Moses, Abraham, David, Samson, every single one of them, they were all flawed individuals. But we have turned our back on being a virtuous people. And when I say a virtuous people, some people get up in arms about it. They don't like the term virtuous. They have this um, pie in the sky kind of understanding of what virtue is. But when I'm talking virtuous people, I'm talking about people that like a high trust. I'm talking about a virtuous people, like a society, people as a community, not people as individuals. So we're talking about high trust societies. We're talking about a community in which you don't have to worry about being robbed if you don't lock your doors at night, or you don't have to worry about your car being stolen if you leave the windows down in it. Um, you can leave a phone out in the open and you don't have to worry about it being stolen from you. You can leave valuable items out in public and nobody's going to mess with it. This is what a virtuous, a high trust society breeds. It breeds a kind of a relaxation and more liberty in reality because always you're not in a open air prison surrounded by criminals and people that wish you harm. You're surrounded by a community of people that are like-minded and live life the way you live life and are hold themselves to high standards and high character. It doesn't mean that they're not going home and masturbating or some stupid like that. I mean, it just means that the society is in a high trust position. If you have a low trust society, if you have a society in which you always worried about crime, you're always worried about violence, you're always worried about theft, you're not free in any stretch of the imagination. You're exactly the opposite of free. You're a slave. You're a slave to your you're a slave to the criminals. You're a slave to the violence. You're a slave to the state because you're depending on the police and you're depending on government to keep you safe. This is not a high trust society. Would be a low trust society. You can look at like into in your cities and what's happening. And what Trump was trying to do in like let's say Washington D.C. was turn Washington D.C. to convert it from a low trust society, a society in which people are slaves and living under anarcho tyranny in their society into a society in which people are more free and have more freedom. And so he brought in the National Guard and worked with the local police to effectively clean up the streets and make it safer for people in order to breed a more high trust society. That's not to say that it's perfect. It will never be perfect. People are always going to be involved. I live in a very small town. It's a very high trust um, community. That doesn't mean that there aren't people that would commit crimes for different reasons. Absolutely, there would be. But we don't even have a local police department. We don't depend on the police to keep us safe. We depend on the goodness and the virtue of each individual to respect each other and keep each other safe and to not wish harm upon each other. It's not always perfect. I mean, like I said, people are involved. People are flawed. People make mistakes. People do things. But the general concept is the high trust society. And this is what the founders were talking about. And this is why they centered everything around Christianity, because they had an understanding at that time that when you build your communities and your states and your colonies and your federal government around God, around Christianity, and you build the monument to Christ and not to man, then you are building a society in which is working on a vertical culture line and not a horizontal culture line. Back to the original. So you got your vertical culture line that leads to holiness, and so you can live this out in your day-to-day lives too. You can look at this and say, okay, what am I doing? All right. Am I living a life of obedience? Right. And you can usher in, bring in the seven virtues, the seven heavenly virtues, right? Charity, humility, chastity, prudence, temperance, kindness, and diligence. And you can say, okay, these are the seven heavenly virtues. these are the central virtues, characteristics of my life, the way I'm going to live my life, the things I'm going to do are all going to be based on these things. Or if you live in a rebellious society, you live by what's known as the seven deadly sins: greed, pride, envy, gluttony, lust, wrath, sloth. And all of us, if we're honest, we can identify on what trajectory we're on. The world is constantly, especially the United States, is constantly getting more chaotic. It is very, it is, it's so normal for there to be chaos in our world, whether it's Antifa riots or, um, Ukrainian refugee getting stabbed on a train, or whatever the situation will be. And there is an effort to by people to bring order into a chaotic world, right? And but not everybody is looking at order in the correct way. They're not all going back to the foundation of holiness, which is the church. Some of them stop short of that. This is part of the reason that Charlie Kirk was such a threat to our society and the way that our society is run, is because the society is one of rebellion that is constantly on the move and sliding further and further into chaos. And as flawed as Charlie Kirk might have been, and I have, plenty of issues with the way that, I wouldn't even say the way he did things. There was something about him that to someone like me felt so I don't even know how to say it. It was almost as if he had the right ideas, right? He was always pointing back to God. He was always pointing back to the church. He was always pointing back to Christ. But it's almost as if he felt like man was the way to get there. Like he stopped just short of going full in on on the traditions of Christianity. And that's what I forgot to bring up. So I'm going to bring that up right now. Um, so and 2:15. You'll see how slow I type. This is what truck driving does for you. You have no typing speed. I have no skill in that level. So if you go to Second Thessalonians 2:15, therefore, brethren, stand fast and hold the traditions which ye have been taught, whether by word or our epistle. Okay. So we're talking about traditions which ye have been taught, whether by word or our epistle, but we're going to stick with that. So the traditions which ye have been taught, that is what the Orthodox Church is so good at pointing back to. And when you listen to like Father Turbo go on Buck Johnson's podcast, and they'll get down into some of the spiritual nitty gritty. But ultimately, what Father Turbo is always talking about, he's always talking about the royal path. What is the royal path? The royal path. He's talking vertical culture. He's talking about staying true to the traditions, because the traditions are the way back into holiness. That is the vertical culture of Christianity that leads to holiness. This is what the saints always followed. So you have the so it's an abandonment of the horizontal culture. The horizontal culture is a culture of man that promotes man, that focuses on the benefits of man, that focuses on the um, the approval of man, whereas the vertical culture is one of tradition that leads to the approval of God, right? And this was the path, the royal path that the saints always traveled, was this vertical culture. We can go to after Judas, who was he was a revolutionary. Judas was a revolutionary, and he had joined Jesus, believing Jesus was the Messiah and believing that the Messiah was supposed to lead a revolution against the Romans and overthrow the tyranny of Rome. And whenever he came to realize that Jesus was not on this path, this is when Judas sold out Christ, right? He sold out Christ, and when Christ was brought before Pilate, Pilate began to question him, and Pilate asked him, "Are you the king?" And Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight that I should not be delivered to the Jews? But now is my kingdom not from hence." So he's saying, I don't belong in this horizontal culture is not my culture. This is not how I live my life. This is not what freedom is. This is not what liberty is. Liberty exists in the vertical culture, not the horizontal culture. And so as this he begins to talk to Pilate about truth and all this, and Pilate's like, well, what even is truth? Because on the horizontal, everything is subjective. Everything is for the benefit of man and for the approval of man. It creates a situation in which the state is the God. And there is no objective truth. The truth is what the state says that the truth is, right? And this is how you end up in a situation like what we see today in our modern society. And the only way to change that are for individuals to follow the royal path, to get on in lineage with the vertical culture and to follow the vertical culture and to live a life of prudence and temperance and diligence and to not break free. And I feel like this whole conversation is a very, I'd say, traditional conversation. It's not something you would typically hear in a Protestant church or in the Protestant lineage of Christianity. And the reason is because there's this belief that once saved, always saved kind of idea where you just say the sinner's prayer and boom, you're changed forever. But that's how do you fundamentally change your life in order to aim your entire goal towards God? Your entire well-being is aimed at getting closer to God. And there's this failure. And I don't know if it's not for lack of trying. I wouldn't say it's for lack of trying. It's just there's this failure in the traditions of the Protestants that are so allergic to traditions because they believe that if you are worried about works, then you stop focusing on Christ. But I would say it's the exact opposite, right? So it's like a man is known by his fruits. So wouldn't it be a situation where your works would show where your faith lies? And if your works show where your faith lies, wouldn't you move and then like it's almost like a fake it till you make it type situation where you take the actions and you go through the steps and you become you make it your daily ritual, your daily habits are looking at God and attempting to move in this way. And you kind of got an idea of this through the what would Jesus do type of movement, but that became very corrupted. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that was began by socialists in order to promote like the state and actions of the state and to gain power for the state. And this isn't to say that there should be like a federal mandated religion. I would never, when you look at the First Amendment, people always say separation of church and state, but that isn't really what it says in the First Amendment. What the First Amendment is saying is that the state cannot punish you for for your religious beliefs, that your religious beliefs are yours to pursue. But many states, many colonies in the founding of the nation did actually enshrine in state constitutions religious belief as mandatory. Yeah, most of the communities that were formed back in the beginning of the founding of the U.S. were built around their religious beliefs. You would have your Episcopal communities, you would have your Baptist communities, you would have your Amish communities, like we see them today. You would have your Catholic communities. So what it was is you didn't want there to be a mandated federal religion like there was in Britain at the time. The king was also the head of the church in Britain of the I think it was the Anglican Church if I'm not mistaken, and they would persecute um, people that were of other Christian denominations. And so they were trying to cut that out. They weren't saying that faith had no place in society, had no place in governance. It was saying you weren't to be persecuted for being of another denomination that wasn't the state denomination, the federal denomination. But on the local levels, that was a complete non sequitur. I mean, these on the local levels, they did pursue specific types of faith within their communities. And actually, even in the political structure of many of the states, it was enshrined that you had to be, of a specific Protestant persuasion in order to run for office and to gain power in the state, in these states. This is why it was such a big deal when Kennedy became president in the 60s, was because he was Catholic, and it was not tradition in the United States for Catholics to be be in office. It was actually very rare. I mean, it wasn't something that you saw often, and he was the first Catholic president. So there was this idea that was enshrined in the people that lived in the Constitution of all Americans, that there was a religion of power, and that was one of Protestantism, and that the Catholics were shunned from running for office and shunned from being delivered political office. And a lot of this changed when Kennedy did win the presidency. So now, let's see, I've covered a lot of this stuff already. So today, kids believe that we live in a secular society, that the United States was born off of secularism, that Christianity has no role in the United States. And this is what they're taught in college. You would hear this a lot. Actually, I just heard, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Michael Knowles or if it was Tucker Carlson at one of the Turning Point USA assemblies here recently. And one of the kids was like, look, this is a secular society. How can you utilize your Christian beliefs to try to pass laws? I believe it was Tucker, because Tucker was like, look, all these laws that you appreciate, the ending of slavery, women's rights, all these things were born out of Christian ideals, right? These are all things that came out of the teachings of Paul and the teachings of Christ. This was not something that it took us a long time to get there, but these were the teachings. They were not teaching when Paul would tell a slave to be a good slave to his master. It was because Paul was trying to tell that slave, like, look, just appreciate the situation you're in, be a good slave to your master, be a good representation of Christ, because Christianity was known as a religion of women and slaves back then. It was frowned upon. It was laughed at. They were scoffed at. Excuse me. And so when we look around today and we see these people demeaning Christianity, saying, "Oh, well, y'all believe Christianity promotes slavery." Well, no, it was actually the exact opposite. Slavery was a reality of the world, and so the Bible, the teachings of the Bible, are giving advice on how to maneuver those realities that were current at that particular point in time. How do you live in that society? How do you understand that society, right? So it wasn't promoting slavery, it was acknowledging the reality of slavery and the reality of slaves. And in this this complete kind of a inability to accept Christianity as the culture is because the culture of secularism is horizontal, it is rebellious, it runs in opposite of the culture of Christ, of the culture of Christianity, and it teaches and it drags people into chaos. And you can see that this wasn't something new. This was Christ talked about this. Ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that endureth to the end shall be saved. It doesn't say that if you say a prayer, you're saved. It says endure to the end. Just stick with me. Just stick with me. It doesn't mean you're not going to stumble. It doesn't mean you're not going to fall. It doesn't mean that you're always going to be perfect. It just stick with me. Just stay the course. Because back then they didn't call Christianity Christianity. They called it the way. Christ was the way. This was the way to do things. Just stick with me. Stay on my heels to the best of your ability. I'm leading the way. If the world hates you, know it hated me before it hated you. So this is a continuation. Yes, like, just stick with me. You're not alone in this. Stay on the vertical culture path. Stay on the royal path. Ignore the horizontal culture. The horizontal culture is the culture of man. It is the culture of rebellions. It is the culture of chaos. It'll pull you away from me if you let yourself get wrapped up in that. My kingdom is not that of this world. My kingdom is of heaven. Just stick with me and I'll get you there. And then here in James 4:4, ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. If you're living in this horizontal culture, it's you're becoming a slave to your passions. You can say, well, I'm free to be hedonistic. I'm free to watch pornography. I'm free to live in my debauchery, in my alcoholism, in my drug addiction. But all these things are vices that hold you down. They're called a vice for a reason. A vice grabs you and it holds you and it keeps you enslaved. The real freedom is turning your back to that and being disciplined. Like you can see this in real life with people that are super extremely successful. They are very disciplined. They stay very disciplined in their task. They they have their whole day lined out, minute to minute, right? Attorneys traditionally charge for 7 minute blocks of time because they're so in sync with their time, especially very successful attorneys. They're so succinct with their time that they monitor it down to 7 minute blocks in order to, oh, excuse me, my nose is just bugging me today. In order to stay on task and to complete the tasks. When you look at like a Joe Rogan who does all these things and he runs a comedy club, he does stand-up comedy, he has his podcast, he does commentary on MMA. He has a family, kids, and he's quite successful in all aspects. He's an avid hunter, um, all these things. That's not by accident. He's constructed his world. His whole life is constructed in a way to where he's always focused on the signal and he blocks out all the noise. That is one of the things that I have the most trouble with is blocking out noise. I get so distracted so easily that Like today, for instance, y'all hear me say it a lot whenever I come in to record podcasts. It's a beautiful day outside. I would much rather be outside, but I can't bring my computer and my laptop and my microphone with me outside because if I'm outside trying to record a podcast, then my dog is harassing me because he thinks if I'm talking, I should be talking only to him, and he's the only thing that matters in this world. Okay, I'll just check my battery life here. For some reason, this charger does not keep this computer charging while I'm using it. I don't know. I might have to switch out chargers at some point. Matthew 24:9. Then shall they deliver you to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And this is all just showing that we're not this horizontal culture that we live among is not our culture, and that this culture is going to hate us. These people are going to hate us. If you live in that horizontal culture, in the world of rebellion, you are going to be loved. You are going to find people to follow you and to love you and to surround yourself with people. It's a lonely life in the vertical on the royal path. It's lonely in the vertical culture. And that's why you must attend church. That's why you must look for the church to help you and find spiritual guides that will help you along the way and push you into that world and encourage you along that path because most people aren't doing that. Being filled with all unrighteousness, this is Romans 1:29 through 30. Being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whispers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents. This sounds like everything we see around us. It looks just like the world we live in. And then we got 1 Corinthians 1:18 here. For the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved, it is the power of God. So the under to be hung on a cross was indignant. It was embarrassing. To be hung from a tree was to be cursed. And so when you would tell people that your Messiah, that your Christ, that your God was hung on a cross and tortured for your sake, it was it was looked down upon. They would mock you and scoff at you and call you crazy because gods were supposed to be strong, like Zeus, show strength and be ruthless. And the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Christ was humble and a servant and full of love. And that wasn't the traditional way that Romans or Greeks viewed gods. That was considered despicable and disreputable. So today we have this we well not today but over a couple of weeks ago we had the No Kings protest, and at that No Kings protest there were a lot of images of Charlie Kirk and a lot of people cheering on the death of Charlie Kirk. There were a lot of people saying that they wished Donald Trump wouldn't have turned his head, that the assassination on Donald Trump would have been successful. um, but to me, and this just kind of gives you a window into the souls of the people that were at that protest. But to me, it goes beyond that. To me, the No Kings protest was a protest not only of the state or not only of the Trump administration. It was protesting God. It was saying we have no kings. Whereas in the Bible, in traditional Christianity, we view Christ as king. They're saying, no, there is no king. I am the ultimate arbiter of what's right and wrong. Morality is subjective and it is dependent on me to depend to determine what morality is good or flawed. There is no objective morality. And in this chaos, as you move, when you look at like an AOC or a Mamdani, they're all pointing at the state as the savior. The state is the God. The state is going to be the one that fixes your problems. It is not going to be done through the church. And they want to pull you away from the church into a worship of the state. And so you end up in this world where you're told liberty is living among these vices in the passions, completely enslaved to the world around you for the benefit and approval of man, and not in the discipline that it takes to get closer to God and not only find holiness, but find true love and true self worth. We see this in the let's go here. Let's do this. No, go away. Thank you. We can go here and we can say, let me see, what was the amount of Americans on food stamps in 1995? This was 30 years ago. So, 1995, approximately 26.6 million Americans were on food stamps. This was down from a peak in the previous year, but participation began to decline significantly after the mid 90s. Well, today it's 42 million. Today we hear that 42 million people will lose their SNAP benefits, which is food stamps, on November 1st because of the government shutdown. These people have glorified government, have made government their God. The government is their provider. Not only are these 42 million people dependent on government, but 36.2%, I believe it's 36.2%. Let me check. What is percentage of the American economy driven by government? 23 to 36% of the US economy, depending on whether you are measuring total government spending or just federal spending. So, total government spending was approximately 36.2% of GDP. So 36.2% of the economy is driven by government spending. So not only do you have 42 million Americans dependent on government for food, this is we're not even counting HUD or GLOs, the government land office, which builds houses. Um, at least here locally in Texas, they do. Not only we're not even talking about that. We're talking about the amount of people that are just the amount of the economy and people that are dependent on government for its well-being, for its nurturing, for its dependence on sugar. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. It's 36.2% of GDP of the US economy is government spending, and 42 million people are dependent on government to eat. This is not the culture of charity that the church should be promoting. And it was taken, you can see, I just saw an article. Where did it say? I don't know. It said something. I believe food stamps. Oh, because that was the last page. That wasn't this page. Yeah. So it says 1972 to 1994. The Social Security Act of 1935, which also put more dependence on government. Do. Okay. So I'm looking around. I was trying to think, uh, when did when were food stamps started? 1919. The first food stamp program in the U.S. was started in 1939 as a temporary initiative during the Great Depression. It was made permanent in 1964. So in 1939, so we're talking FDR days, I think. Yeah. So in 1939, food stamps, the food stamp program was started. In 1935, the Social Security program was started. When was HUD started? United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, founded September 9th, 1965. So, so you see from the beginning of Social Security, let's see, what was it? I want to make sure that I got this right. I think I'm right. Yeah, 33. Yeah. So March 4th, 1933, FDR becomes president to April 12th, 1945. He started a lot of different programs, but among those, it appears that Social Security and food stamps were among those. Now, you can make all the arguments and say, well, we had to do something for people, right? We had to print money and go into debt and do all these things in order to provide for people. But what happened to charity? Because that's how communities used to keep things in order, was through charity. Let's see. I don't know if I do this. Let's go stop share. All right. So it was through charity, through family, and the destruction of the family and the destruction of charity came as the government became more powerful and stronger and more relied upon for people's well-being. This moved the culture away from the royal path, the vertical culture, and moved it into a more horizontal culture in which we were dependent on the state, dependent on um, the the chaos that comes with printing money and inflating the money supply and diminishing the lives of American citizens, which really you you'll hear me talk about the productive class and the parasite class, right? So I mean, you can easily look at that 42 million Americans as parasites, but so are like corporations like Walmart. They're parasites too, because they're going to lose billions of dollars when the SNAP benefits go away. Because a lot of the income that comes into Walmart is government money. So there's this push and pull between the parasites at the top and the parasites at the bottom, and that are like surround the productive class, those that pay the taxes, that do the hard work, that are delivering the goods, that are keeping the electricity on, that are fixing your plumbing. The productive class, the steel workers, the iron workers, the builders, the carpenters, the electricians, all these guys, all these skill labor jobs. These people are productive. These people are producing. They're not hedge fund managers in bed with government, buying government like benefits. They're not bankers that are in bed with government, buying government benefits. They're not part of this corrupt parasitic system, right? And if you look at the amount of the economy that is tied up in these parasitic points of the government, they are drawing people into more chaos. They are creating a system of of chaos and corruption and murder. I mean, look at the wars, the military industrial complex, the academies promoting the degeneracy and hate, right? You hear podcasters on the left now talk about how if the Democrat Party doesn't get with cheering on the murder of conservatives, that they're going to start coming for the Democrats. You know, this this pull into the rebellion, into the chaos of the culture is getting stronger and stronger the more that we fight back and move back to the church. And as people are moving back to the church to find that royal path, to find that vertical culture line, the horizontal culture is kicking and screaming and begging for death and destruction to us. And so we have to get really serious with ourselves about what true liberty looks like, what true liberty is in our lives. What is it? The dependence on drugs? Is it the dependence on alcohol? Is it dependence on the financial institutions? Is it dependence on the surrounding culture of debauchery and pornography? Or is it the discipline to do better and to move forward and to search for God? That's what the true question is. And if we hold true to those traditions and we stand firm in our faith, and Jay Dyer will be right, that we will win the culture war as Orthodox Christians because those traditions are timeless. That faith is powerful. You look at how St. Paul converted Rome, it was through his death. His determination to convert the emperor of Rome led to his demise, and it converted an entire nation. An entire empire was converted. And so, but it was that standing firm that I'm not taking a step back. This is objectively true. This is the objective facts, and this is what's real. And that's where these cultures diverge. That's where you get this frantic call for murder and violence and prayer and vigil. And that's the divergence that we need to promote is the prayer and vigil to shun the debauchery, the pornography, the the lies, the deceit of the horizontal culture, of the rebellious culture, of the chaos that comes with just trying to please man and move into the church and search for Christ. I think I did it. So I hope all that made sense to y'all. If y'all have any questions, tommysounds@gmail.com. I'll be starting, there will be a new podcast popping up on my Substack and on my YouTube. Um, Coming this Sunday, we're going to start reading the lives of the Desert Fathers. We're going to, we listened to Tim Pool and Seamus Coughlin and the Daily Wire and all these people talk about, I think it was, yeah, Daily Wire. I always get Daily Mail and Daily Wire confused. Talk about creating culture and making these movies and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they're all moving on the horizontal. It doesn't mean they can't be shifted to the vertical, but they're all on the horizontal right now. And so is even though I'm not a theologian, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a priest, I'm just some mealy mouth truck driver that likes to shoot off at the hip. I have books, and I don't know. I feel like it's the right thing to do. Is if we're going to start talking about this culture and we're going to start moving in this way, then let's uplift the correct heroes. Let's stop focusing on business moguls and athletes and entertainers and looking at the real heroes and the real superstars, those that successfully conquered the horizontal culture and walked the royal path and left like impacted the world, impacted our lives in ways that we don't even understand completely. Those that if we mimic will become closer to God instead of closer to wealthy. The wealth of the world is not what we should be aiming for. It's the wealth of the next kingdom, the kingdom that is still to come. So hopefully y'all stick around for that. I will not be posting that at the Libertarian Institute. This will go up at the Libertarian Institute. This is my my weekly political podcast, I guess. Um, as far as I strayed off the path of politics, I mean, I tried to intermingle it in some and kind of give you a glimpse into the way my mind works and how I try to work through all these different things and and view liberty through an orthodox lens. I'm not perfect. I know I'm not perfect. So um, I struggle with the horizontal culture too, the the culture of rebellion coming from the metal world. Being a guy that liked to party. Um, I've had two divorces. I'm certainly not perfect. I certainly have a lot of flaws and I have a lot of work to do. But there is a path out there and there's a framework to follow. And so we're going to start trying to do our best to dive into that. And so join me Sunday evening. I won't do it live. I might actually read it today, either today or Saturday, and release it out Sunday. I'm gonna plan on. I'll probably schedule it for like 6 p.m. Central. So any kids, if you have kids that you want to have listen to the pod, listen to the teachings of, or not teachings of the saints, but the lives of the saints. We'll start doing that. We might read some of the teachings of the saints too at some point. So I got some of those books up here too. So we'll do what we can. I have plenty of books to deal with. Some of them from the 20th century, some of them from a long, long time ago. But we're going to start with the Desert Fathers. So, all right. Well, I think that's all I got. I don't know how long I recorded. Hopefully, it's enough for y'all. I'll just ramble. So we will see y'all later.